with 60-second letters, with going out and meeting their congressmen, with perhaps even running for office themselves. Anything that gets self-reliant people motivated to make a positive change.
There's been a lot of debate over the past, well, probably since I don't know how long the debate's been raging, but about the actual definition of the words in the Second Amendment. And I don't really care what everybody else thinks, so I'm interested in what you think. What do you think it is meant by a well-regulated militia?
Wow. You know, according to U.S. code, the militia is supposedly all able-bodied men aged, I believe it's 16 to 45, unless it's been edited and my understanding is incorrect. But at one point, I believe it was all able-bodied men aged 16 to 45. And then there's a branching of it where you talk about the organized versus the unorganized militia. To me, as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, the militia they're referring to is the unorganized militia, which is everybody in the U.S. Being able to maintain individual proficiency with firearms. We're not talking about people starting private militias and practicing demolitions use and group tactics and all sorts of weird stuff like that. We're just talking about the individual lay people being able to proficiently use their firearms in the event that there was some sort of reason for them to need their firearms, whether it's personal defense or community defense or even national defense if the space aliens come and land in America or something.
Or the Canadians.
Or the Canadians invade, like South Park, exactly.
And specifically, I want your opinion on the two words, well-regulated. What do you think they were talking about 200 years ago when they said well-regulated?
It's very well documented that regulation to them meant the ability to turn out and be proficient with your firearm. It's very well documented.
So to be well-regulated was a compliment, meant like a crack troops.
Exactly.
It wasn't
now, the concept of the militia as it existed in the 18th century and the early part of the 19th century was for organized civil defense because you didn't have sheriff's offices. You didn't have police. Those colonials would meet together on their parade ground or the common green in their towns, and they would practice line formations. They would practice volley discharge. They would practice all these things, reloading as a unit. And to be well-regulated meant that each man could fire 3 shots inside of a minute in an organized fashion and reload at the same speed as the men next to him and so forth. It didn't mean that they all met together at that time in order to indoctrinate themselves with anti-government hate speech or anything like that. It just meant that they got together, and they also didn't get together in order to register with the city council that, you know, they had X number of firearms and that they were only allowed to carry Y number of firearms with them when they went out and about. Regulation wasn't in regards to restricting their ability to have firearms. It was just the fact that they practiced.
I know that you're have read a lot about the Revolutionary War, and you're
a little bit.
A little bit?
A little bit. Not as much as a lot of other people. I'm not a huge history buff. I do enjoy history, and I like the Revolutionary War period. And I've read more than the minimum requirement in order to be an Appleseed instructor, and I enjoy the period. I really do. But I'm not a huge bookworm on it. But fire away.
Well, I'm not going to ask you specific questions. I just would. What are some of the more impactful things you've learned about the Revolutionary War? What are some of the stories that have inspired you?
First off, Paul Revere's my hero. Probably more so than anybody else. Yeah, I believe more so than anybody else. And it's purely because the man communicated and he acted. You actually had two horse riders on the night of April 18th or the morning of April 19th, 1775. You had Paul Revere coming across Boston Back Bay and heading out through Charlestown and off to Lexington and Concord. And then you also had William Dawes come out through Boston Neck from the south and then come up through Cambridge and on to Lexington. Nobody, aside from historians and history buffs, really knows much of anything about William Dawes. And it's because William Dawes didn't network as effectively as Paul Revere. Paul Revere was a member, I want to say, of about a dozen different revolutionary groups at that time, information gathering networks, all kind of subtext over one organization loosely known as the Sons of Liberty. He was a member of the Mechanics, first and foremost, and several others. But the Mechanics was, maybe 10 or a dozen guys or something in Boston who kept notes on troop movements. But the Sons of Liberty in general embodied the entire New England Crown resistance movement. And Revere knew everybody, it seemed. He knew everybody in every town in order to initiate a chain reaction of communication. And as a result of that, it was the north side of Battle Road that caused the most problems for Colonel Smith as he was returning back after his burning of Concord. It was the north side of Battle Road that was constantly bristling with colonial militia that were angry at the Redcoat Column. The south side of Battle Road remained largely unpopulated. There were places here and there, but the turnout from the towns further south there wasn't as much turnout from the towns further south, and it's because Dawes didn't stop and talk to people. We can all button up in our own little worlds and try and make the best of it just for ourselves, and we can be like, I'm not saying William Dawes was completely selfish or anything like that. He certainly contributed and did his duty well on April 18th and 19th. But the allegory I take from it is we can always do more. And Revere did more. And I can either sit in my little world and make things as good as possible for me, or I can contribute further outwards so that I motivate other people to take action. And that's what I intend to do with the Appleseed program.